Hey, what's up guys? JB here. So it is time once again for another versus battle, and in a first for the series today, we're going to be looking at two different 70 cost damage dealers. And these are two units that we're going to be seeing here in Global over the next couple of weeks. It was confirmed in the recent live stream, with Lynx actually joining us here tomorrow. Now, at least over in JP, they did do something just a little bit differently with these two units in terms of monetization. They're basically both going to be available to straight up buy them with paid Visior. Those bundles over in JP came with 200 shards and some other goodies as well. And with some pack H's being recently released in the shop, I know that at least some folks out there will be sort of weighing their options right now in terms of these units. You know, which one is going to be better to pull, which one might be better to throw some paid Visior down for. So we're going to be running the gauntlet here on them today. We'll be scrutinizing these two units from top to bottom, pitting them against each other with more than 50 points of comparison and analysis. So without further ado, this is the battle of Shadow Lynx versus Kitone.
Round one, fight!
So kicking it off today with round one, this is the damage round. And here we're going to be looking at the pure damage related attributes and see how they're stacking up against one another. And with both of these two units being that sort of DPS damage dealer role, this will be one of the most important rounds. So first up, we're going to be looking at their primary damage attribute in terms of stats. That will be their attack value. And here in category 1, it is Kitone that will be getting that nod, coming in with not only a superior base value, but a much better innate value there as well. And she's going to be outpacing her here by a pretty significant margin. And that advantage will extend just a bit further, you know, when you do consider the attribute scaling of their attacks and maybe any additional, passives that you are able to equip onto them. Now, the next category here is going to be maximum range. And that is going to be going to Shadow Lynx. It's really not much of a comparison there. Of course, she is a missile unit, so she's going to have a significant edge in this department, maxing out with a potential 9 range on her limit burst if you do utilize both of her range up passives. On the other hand, Kitone being a fist-based unit, range is very much a limitation for her, with the majority of her attacks being within that 3 to 4 range window. Now the next two here in terms of accuracy and crit rate. For accuracy, I'm going to pretty much call this one a wash. Although Lynx does technically have a bit of an edge here, I don't really think that it's by a wide enough margin that it's really all that material. For crit rate, both units are actually going to be coming in above average, but I am going to give the nod here to Shadow Lynx. She is certainly on the higher spectrum of the game in that category, being a much more crit-focused unit in general in terms of some of the crit damage up that she has access to, and with a much stronger base dexterity that she's able to build off of. Now the next one up here is going to be access to modifier enhancements through either buffs or other means, and Lynx is going to take this category once again, where both of her main kit buffs do upgrade her damage modifiers. Whereas Kitone, on the other hand, she doesn't have access to any of that within her kit whatsoever, so she will be relying on teammates or other external means for that. Now, one of the most important attributes for any damage dealer in the game will be their innate penetration values, not only from a defense or spirit perspective, but also for their main damage type. And once again, I am going to give a small edge to Shadow Lynx in this category. Although she is a little bit lower, in terms of her defense penetration, she does come in with a 15% base missile penetration, which you are able to build off of, whereas Kitone, on the other hand, she doesn't have any base strike res penetration there innately in her kit. Now that edge, I do believe, does extend into the current meta picture as well, because over the last 4 to 5 months, the majority of units have been coming in with a missile weakness. Whereas on the other hand, the majority of characters have been coming in with a positive strike resistance. So I do believe that that is going to go in Shadow Lynx's favor here as well. Now to finish off the round here today, these last 4 categories are going to be pertaining to how they are actually delivering that damage. First one up being who is superior when it comes to area of effect damage. It's not a strength whatsoever when it comes to Kitone. She's going to be limited to a couple of small cross patterns. To be honest, it's not going to be a huge strength of Shadow Lynx here either. However, I would say that she is a little bit above average in that regard, having access to not only a cross pattern on her limit burst, but also multiple attacks which are coming in a 3x3 block or 9 tiles of effect. Now the next one that I have here in the list is, do they have access to a follow-up or chaser attack? This one's going to go to Kitone very easily. She has access to one, Shadow Lynx does not. Now, one thing we have been seeing coming to the game more often as of late have been those multi-select attacks. Of course, you think of units like Alaya and Soul specifically. And this category is going to end up being a wash between these units. Both of them do have access to select 2 attacks within their main kit. And then the last one here, finally, to wrap this round up, do they have access to any sort of guaranteed hit attacks within their kits? And this one's going to go to Shadow Lynx. She has access to not 1, but 2 different guaranteed hits within her kit, whereas Kitone, on the other hand, she doesn't have any of those. I will say, though, that Kitone does have access to an enhanced hit modifier on her Job 25 ability. It does give her an enhanced 30% chance to hit on that specific attack. So tallying up this damage round here, guys, Lynx is going to take this one pretty easily, 6 points to 2, and I think that's mostly going to be on the back of her versatility here as an attacker.
Round 2. Fight!
All right, guys, we're on to round 2. This one is all about utility. What effects and unique skills are they bringing to help turn the tide in battle? Now, the first category here is going to be one of the most important to have on any team, and that is a barrier breaker. And it is going to be Kitone that is going to be taking this one. Although I will say that it is just a single target attack and it is pretty limited in its range. Nevertheless, though, Shadow Lynx doesn't have access to one, so Kitone takes this one quite easily. Now, next one up here is going to be stat break debuffs. Attack, magic, defense, or spirit, or etc. And here they both have access to those in some way. For Kitone, she has an agility break debuff, as well as some skills that probably will never see much use within her knight subjob. On the other hand, Shadow Lynx, well, she doesn't have access to the type of stat break debuffs that we've been used to seeing. Her Limit Burst, I think, has something that may be even better, whereas it just straight up cuts your physical and magical damage by a full 20%. The caveat there, of course, is that being a Limit Burst, it is just a single-use effect, but nevertheless, I do think that it can have a pretty big impact in the battle. So considering that, I'm going to call this one even, just because Kitone's agility debuff, it does stack with other agility breaks in the game since it is an on-hit effect, so I think that's actually pretty good too. Now the third one up here is going to be the ability to seal or negate the opponent's ability to actually debuff you. This is an all-new mechanic that Shadow Lynx is going to be introducing here to War of the Visions. And to be perfectly honest, this is an incredible new capability when you consider how powerful some of the recent debuffs that have been introduced. You think of things like Alaya the Alabaster's Limit Burst with that super high Imperil. You also think about the area resist shred that have been coming in on units like Helena as well. Now, of course, because this is all new, there is really no comparable in the game at the moment, and certainly Kitone doesn't have access to it either, so this is a clear edge for Lynx here in this category. Now, another very important one is Immortal Spirit or Re-Raise Dispel. Unfortunately, Kitone doesn't have access to either of those, while Lynx, on the other hand, she does have an Immortal Spirit Dispel within her main kit. And that is actually coming in on a guaranteed hit ability, which is very nice and does give it some additional versatility. So once again, she's going to be taking this category. I will say, though, that this one is actually relatively close. Remember that Kitone does have that follow-up attack that we mentioned, which, certainly, if you are able to finish units off, relatively early in the fight while that is active, it can pop that Immortal Spirit. It can sometimes even deal with re-raise as well, depending on the modifiers that you're able to enhance into it. I'm going to give the nod here to Lynx, though, just because it is a permanent skill that she'll have access to throughout the match, and, certainly that's going to be more versatile when you get into these more extended fights and being able to finish certain units off. Now, along similar lines here, in terms of various dispels, another very important one these days is a general dispel, in terms of removing various buffs or haste. It's something that we've actually seen lacking on many of the recent units, but in this case, actually both of these 70 cost units do have that capability within their main kits. Even better, they are coming in on multi-select attacks, meaning that, they are going to be able to hit multiple units with them. So this one I'm actually going to end up calling even. Now, the next one up here is going to be Resistance and Perils. Lynx actually does have a couple of different options. She has a unit resist and peril within her ranger subjob, as well as an area resist shred on her limit burst. Kitone, on the other hand, she has a strike resistance shred within her main kit. It's actually the first we've seen of that type coming into the game. It can potentially reduce up to 60% of your current strike resist value. So certainly both units here do have pretty nice options available to them. If I was grading it purely on versatility, I would probably give this one here to Shadow Lynx, just because, her her more generic imperils are useful to a more wide range of units in the game. I think overall, though, I am going to give the nod here to Kitone and kind of give her due here, simply because of the fact that her strike resist shred is a capability we've not seen on any other unit in the game, and it does come in on an area of effect attack within her main kit. Now the next three here are all going to be going to Shadow Lynx. She's going to have the edge here on some unique debuffing capabilities. She has a chain resistance break, which is going to ramp up the effect of your chain modifiers. She has a complete reaction seal, which is going to turn off the counter abilities of your opponents. And finally, on that select 2 attack that we did mention, it is bringing in another unique mechanic to the game, in that it will reduce the effectiveness of the enemy's buffs by 50%. So not only is she dispelling those buffs that they may be carrying at that moment, any buffs that you may try to apply actively after that are going to be reduced in their effectiveness. So very cool skill all around. So finally here, guys, wrapping up the utility rounds. And this one here is somewhat inconsequential. I'm going to call this last one even. Although both units do have access to some ailments within their kit, neither of these units are really designed around using those capabilities, and neither of them are really units that I would consider running at a high faith because of that. So that is going to do it for the utility round here, guys, and Lynx once again is very much walking away with this one. She's taking this round here 5 points to 2.
Round 3. Fight!
All right, rapid fire here, guys. We're on to round 3. This is going to be the support rounds. And here we're going to be looking at how these units can help themselves or their allies in the fight in terms of buffs or healing or etc. And to kick this one off here, the first two are going to be healing centric. The first one is, do they have any sort of flat healing or ability to heal their allies in the battle? And Lynx is actually going to take this one. She has the Axe Knight sub-job, which does have the Axe Knight remedy skill, and that is going to give you a 20% self-heal. Now, something that, may be useful, if no enemies are in range, or, perhaps on that first turn of a second Guild War strike. The second one here, sort of along the same lines, is do they have any sort of drain or HP absorb skills within their kit? And this one is actually a hallmark of Kitone as a unit, and it's kind of a nod back to her original version and the Drain Force build that she's specialized in. She actually has several ways to drain or absorb the HP of her opponents, and she's going to be able to take this second one here very, very easily. Now, my third category here in the list is going to be access to a barrier. Barriers have actually gained quite a bit of relevance as of late, as there haven't been as many elite barrier breakers being used within the meta. And here, both units have access to physical barriers within their kits. I am going to give the edge here to Shadow Lynx, though, as hers is a much superior 7500 HP variant that she does have from her Axe Knight sub-job, as opposed to Kitone's, which is a much more mundane 3-hit 50% version. Now, the next three here in the list are all going to be various mitigations that they might have access to, and all three here are once again going to be going to Shadow Lynx. First up, she does have access to one of the new styles of mitigation that has been introduced recently, and this one is going to be the Honeycomb barrier that we did see introduced with Squall a few months ago. She does also have access to a 20 unit resist buff that can go not only to herself, but the party. And then finally, within that Axe Knight sub-job, she does have a party buff for both defense and chain resistance protection if you ever happen to need it. Kitone, on the other hand, she doesn't have access to any of these capabilities. The next category here is going to be Immortal Spirit or Re-Raise. Do either of them have it? And Kitone actually has traded off some of those additional mitigation capabilities that we were talking about for an innate Immortal Spirit that will be active, assuming that she is above an HP threshold of 70%. Once again, very much a nod back to her original version and the Immortal Spirit that she had there as well. So assuming that she is above that HP threshold, it's not going to be possible to one-shot this unit, so big advantage for Kitone here. Now, the final three categories of the round are going to be speed and turn order related, and the first one here is going to be access to any sort of CT up buffs. That is going to be another hallmark for Kitone as a unit. Nearly all of the abilities within her main kit do restore CT back to her bar, even up to including her counter ability. And the overall culmination of it is really the first of its kind that we've seen in the game with so many different CT up effects. She even has a passive that does block CT down being used against her, so she really is kind of a time master as a unit. Now, in terms of an agility buff, they do both have access to one for 25%. I am once again even going to be giving a slight nod here to Kitone, as hers is tied into one of her active attack abilities, meaning that there's a pretty high probability that she's going to be able to refresh that as the battle wears on. Now finally, to wrap up this round, this one is going to be haste capability, and Kitone kind of fitting in with this theme that we've been talking about here. She does have a self-haste that is coming in on her limit burst, so she's going to take this final one here as well. So tallying up the point totals here, guys, the support round is going to end up even, 5 points to 5.
Round 4. Fight!
Alright guys, here is round 4. This one is going to be an all-new round for my Versus series. Here I'm going to be examining and comparing their respective job or weapon classes. Of course, with new job-based vision cards being introduced into the game on a monthly basis, the actual job of the character is more and more a part of that unit's evaluation. Now Shadow Lynx is going to be part of that bow group, while Kitone here is going to be part of the fist class. Now the points here in this round are going to be very straightforward, so I'm going to run through these here very quickly. The first point here going to be going to Kitone. The amount of UR units available within the job class is significantly higher, 14 units within the fist class as opposed to 9 currently for bow. The next couple here are going to be unit related as well in terms of support or tank available within the job class. Well, within the fist group, there is actually a couple of different tanks available. Think about Snow and Alphonse specifically. On the flip side, the bow group is a much more supportive group overall. We have units like Rosa, Fina, and I would even consider Nivlu a support unit within that group. Now the next one I have here, does the job class have any meta units available within it? The fist group actually has several coming in over the last 9 to 12 months. You think back to the Elric brothers, even more recently with Alaya, Perrine, and now 2P. The bow class, on the other hand, really has never had a big meta unit other than maybe Eliza, and it has actually been quite some time for her, so very much deficient when it comes to meta units. Now the next 3 categories here are going to be vision card related, and the fist group does have the edge here thus far as well, with 12 cards versus 8 for the bow group. Sort of slicing up and analyzing those cards, the number of cards that I would consider primary viable, meaning agility, area resist, or unit resist, fist is going to take that one as well at 7 cards versus 3. Now the last one here is going to be the number of cards within that group that are limited time, meaning that you aren't able to get them if you did miss them on their initial run. That is obviously a big drawback, especially for a group like Bow, which hasn't been built up significantly. And the fist group is going to take that one as well, with just 50% of the cards being limited versus 62% of the cards being limited to the Bow group. So as you can see, as I sort of paint the picture here, the bow group has very much been on the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to job vision cards and units. There really hasn't been a lot of attention devoted to it, in this first year of the system. There's quite a disparity here because the fist group is among the best, if not the best, thus far in the job era, which at the end of the day does make the fist group much more vibrant and viable play in the meta right now, and does give Kitone more additional value at being used outside of her own elements. Well, on the other hand, the bow group really is not all that viable right now in terms of a mono job play, and at least for the short term, I think that makes Shadow Lynx much more relegated to mono element teams, or perhaps dual elements either mixed with ice or earth. So that brings us to the final category of this round here, guys, and this one is very much going to be more of a speculative one, and that's sort of pondering, what is the future going to hold for these groups? I would think with Kitone here being introduced to the group as a viable 70 cost option within it, I think they're probably going to be done here with the fist group and sort of let the chips lie where they may. Whereas I do think that Lynx is very much going to be an initial building block here for the bow group as we go into 2024. We have seen art assets within the game for young Curry, his mother, Grandma Wazette. I believe even one of the Veritas units is going to be wielding a bow. And then Rosaluna, which, is a prime candidate for a top-of-the-line 100 cost unit. All of which could potentially see release for the bow group this year. And of course come with corresponding vision cards. Of course, there's no way that we can say that with any sort of certainty. Our look ahead into that JP timeline is very much lessened these days. But if I was a betting man, I think that I would give this last one here to the bow group. All in all, though, this battle here was not very competitive. Kitone is going to take this one here 7-2.
Fight!
So here we are, guys. This is going to be our final deciding round, and this is X Factors. And here we're going to be looking at the attributes that maybe don't necessarily fit into the other categories, and maybe a few things in here which may be easier to overlook. But really, when you look at them and add them up, at the end of the day, they do represent a nice overall value. So kicking this one off, as always, their chaining prowess. I'm very happy to say that both of these units are very capable in that regard, and both will make very nice guild grade and PvE units as well, as they do carry multiple chaining options within their kit, as well as those debuffs that we mentioned earlier, which could potentially be relevant for that high-end PvE play. So here, I'm actually going to call this category even. Now the next one I have here is going to be their speed or agility factor. They're both very comparable in that regard, right down to the fact that they do have agility passives that you'll probably be using in most builds, as well as those 25% agility buffs that we did talk about before. I am going to give Kitone a slight nod here though, simply because speed is really her thing as a unit. Not only does she have all of those agility factors, but she does have the CT and haste potential as well, all built into the main kit. So I do have to give this one here to Kitone. Now, what about mobility? Both of these units do have very nice options available to them, coming in with that base 2 jump, which can be very important on some maps. And they do both have passive abilities which can manipulate their movements, so I do think this category is pretty comparable as well. Once again though, I am going to be giving the edge to Kitone, simply because she does have a way to increase her mobility not only within the passive, but also within an active buff as well. So I do think that that gives her a little bit more versatility overall. Now the next 3 categories I have here are all going to be going to Shadow Lynx. First one's going to be AP Sustain or AP Management. Not only does she get initial AP up on her unique weapon, but she also has an option within her passives to decrease AP consumption if you needed it. And then on top of that, she does have several AP restore capabilities within her main kit there as well. Kitone, on the other hand, she's not terrible whatsoever in that regard, but I don't think that what she does quite measures up to Lynx's capabilities. For counter abilities, Lynx is going to have access to Reflex, one of the best ones in the game. She does also have a very long-range preemptive attack as well that could be very handy. Kitone, on the other hand, her counter abilities, not as much of a strength for her. Hers is going to add an HP absorb capability to her next attack, as well as a small CT increase. So I think it's pretty decent, certainly unique, and does fit into her motif as a unit. But I do think there are going to be many cases where she isn't able to actually get value out of that because maybe her next turn isn't going to come around quick enough for her to capitalize on it. Now on that same note, what is going to be their innate reaction block capability? Well, Lynx can get a potential 65% there if you do bring in her passive, whereas this is actually one of Kitone's major weaknesses as a unit. She's coming in with 0% innately. Now the next category here is going to be base mitigation related, and really looking at the impenetrable ones here. Lynx is going to be coming in with 15 area resist as part of her mastery, which is pretty solid. Kitone, on the other hand, does come in with a 15% flat reduction in magical damage in her mastery. So just sort of comparing those two against one another, I would probably throw that one Lynx's way. But the X factor here is that Kitone does get an conditional 15% reduction on her unique weapon, as well as a passive ability that she can pull in for 12 area resist as well. So I'm going to give the nod here in this category to Kitone. Now, another X factor for a unit that we always like to look at is what is their TMR bringing? Does it have a unique effect? Does it have good stats? And I do actually like the effects on both of their TMRs. I do actually probably like Lynx's a little bit more just because it is very unique with the /res penetration debuff. Unfortunately, it's just a lot more limited in who can actually use it and take advantage of it because it is a cloth armor. On the other hand, Kitone's is an accessory, automatically making it much more versatile, and it is the first one that we've seen coming into the game with an 8 agility value in that TMR slot, so it is kind of the first small power creep we've seen on that since day 1 of the game, which is actually pretty crazy. So just simply because of that, I do have to give this one to Kitone as well. The final category of the round is going to be their cost. That is certainly an X factor when it comes to limited cost play, like limited guild war or class match. And of course, that is going to be even between them. They are both 70 cost units. So adding it all up here, guys, this one is going to Kitone as well. She's going to take X factors here, 4 points to 3. So that is going to be my battle of Shadow Lynx versus Kitone. Nearly 50 different categories, 5 rounds, 2 units, but there can be only one winner today. And I think if you've watched this far, I think you know who that is. It is going to be Shadow Lynx who's going to be my winner today. The overall mix of survivability, the utility, and support aspects that she brings, I think it just ended up being a little bit more of an overall package than what Kitone brings, at least on paper. The overall round score ended up being even at 2-2 since they did split that 3rd round. However, the overall point total in terms of the individual categories did go to Shadow Lynx at a 21-20 clip. My one sort of asterisk on that though is that I think if you did eliminate that job class comparison, it really wasn't super close, in terms of the individual points. Do remember though that what the unit can do on paper is really only part of the story when evaluating a unit. The situation that they're coming into with their elements, with their job class, is another very big part of being able to get value out of them right away. So as always, when it comes to any unit, you do need to evaluate what pieces you have to put around them, and is that unit going to be set up for success with the units that you can team up with your account. And I do think that's even more so when it comes to these 70 cost units that really are not designed to be team carries on their own, but are generally more intended to be complementary pieces for your team, or maybe have more of a short-term window of when they're viable within the meta. And in that regard, as I alluded to in that job class section, Kitone, at least for now, I think does have a bit more versatility with that fist group situation that she's coming into. And because of that, I think we'll see more widespread play right off the bat. I do feel pretty strongly, though, that over the long haul, Lynx does offer more long-lasting party utility, more unique capabilities, while at the same time giving Water a viable range threat that they really haven't had in quite some time. So that is going to do it, guys. I do hope that you enjoyed this one. Hit me up and let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video today, hit that like button. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.